Alonso Quijano, Don Quixote, an aging Spanish nobleman who loses his mind from reading too many books about knights and decides to become a knight-errant himself. Sancho Panza, a simple, uneducated peasant farmer who becomes Quixote's squire. He provides a funny, realistic contrast to Quixote's madness. Rocinante, Don Quixote's old, worn-out horse, whom he imagines as a grand steed. Dulcinea del Toboso, a local peasant girl, Aldonza Lorenzo, whom Quixote has never met but whom he chooses to be his noble lady to fight for. Part 1, published in 1605. The madness begins. Alonso Quijano lives in La Mancha, Spain. He spends all his time and money reading romantic tales of knights, wizards, and damsels in distress. Eventually, his brain fries from lack of sleep and too much reading. He decides to rename himself Don Quixote, polishes up some old, rusty armor, and sets out on his skinny horse, Rocinante, to revive the ancient code of chivalry. The first journey in Sancho Panza. On his first solo trip, he mistakes a cheap roadside inn for a grand castle and forces the terrified innkeeper to officially dub him a knight. Realizing a proper knight needs a squire, he returns home and convinces his neighbor, Sancho Panza, to join him. Sancho is lured by the promise that Quixote will make him the governor of an island one day. Sancho brings his donkey, Dapple, and the duo sets out. The most famous misadventures. Part 1 consists of a series of episodic adventures where Don Quixote misinterprets the real world through the lens of his books, while Sancho tries and fails to talk sense into him. The Windmills. Quixote mistakes giant windmills for fierce giants. He charges them with his lance, gets caught in a sail, and is thrown brutally to the ground. He blames an evil sorcerer, Fraton, for turning the giants into windmills at the last second to steal his glory. The flocks of sheep. He sees two large clouds of dust and believes they are two advancing armies. He charges into the fray, slaughtering several sheep before the angry shepherds beat him up. The barber's basin. He attacks a traveling barber and steals his brass shaving basin, firmly believing it is the mythical, magical helmet of Mambrino. The return home. Quixote's friends from his village, the local priest and the barber, are deeply worried. They find him out in the wild, trick him by putting him into a wooden cage, and bring him back home in an ox cart. Part 2, published in 1615. Part 2 is much more psychological and metafictional. Cervantes wrote it 10 years later, and in this story, the characters in the book have actually read Part 1 of the novel and already know who Don Quixote and Sancho Panza are. Setting out again. Despite his family's best efforts, Quixote regains his energy and sets out on a third journey with Sancho. This time, Sancho plays along with his master's madness. When Quixote wants to see Dulcinea, Sancho points to the first ugly, rough peasant girl he sees on the road and tells Quixote she is Dulcinea, but that an evil wizard has cursed her to look like a peasant. Quixote is heartbroken and accepts this. The cruel Duke and Duchess. Quixote and Sancho encounter a wealthy Duke and Duchess who have read Part 1. Instead of helping Quixote, they decide to amuse themselves by playing elaborate, cruel pranks on the duo. They stage fake magical events and tell Quixote that to break Dulcinea's curse, Sancho must whip his own bare buttocks 3,300 times, which Sancho constantly avoids. They actually give Sancho the governorship of a small town, an island, to mock him. Surprisingly, Sancho proves to be a wise, just, and practical ruler. However, after a week of being starved by a royal doctor and facing a staged enemy attack, Sancho realizes that a simple peasant life is much safer and happily quits. The defeat and end. Don Quixote travels to Barcelona. There, a young scholar from his home village named Sanson Carrasco disguises himself as a rival knight called the Knight of the White Moon. Sanson challenges Quixote to a duel with a strict condition. If Quixote loses, he must lay down his arms and return home for 1 full year. The Knight of the White Moon easily defeats Don Quixote. Broken-hearted, but bound by his knightly honor, Quixote returns to La Mancha. Back home, Quixote falls dangerously ill with a fever. As he nears death, his mind suddenly clears, and his madness vanishes. He realizes that the books of chivalry were all nonsense, apologizes to Sancho for dragging him into danger, writes his will, and dies peacefully as Alonso Quijano. Key themes: idealism versus realism. Don Quixote represents extreme idealism, seeing the world as it should be, while Sancho Panza represents harsh realism, seeing the world exactly as it is. Over time, they influence each other. Sancho becomes more imaginative, and Quixote becomes more grounded. The power of fiction. The book questions how the stories we consume shape our perception of reality. Perspective. Cervantes shows that what one person sees as a windmill, another sees as a giant, suggesting that truth often depends on the observer's worldview.